Hi, I'm That Slavic Writer Guy, and today we're going to be talking about Jacques Offenbach, The Tales of Hoffmann. Now, while many operas have multiple different accepted versions of them, Tales of Hoffmann really takes the cake on this in that the opera you are going to see depends almost totally on the stage director's uh, vision for the opera or on the set designers. So, without further ado, let's get into this gobbledygook of whatever you may see when you go to see Tales of Hoffmann and Gremo Opero. The Tales of Hoffmann first premiered on February 10th, 1881, 4 months after the composer's death. It really was still at a stage where the composer was deciding what all to include on it before he died. And so, for that reason, the first performance contained only two of the three main acts that you're likely to see today. It continued to be performed in some version after that, on up through 1897, when a further blow was dealt to what actually comprises this opera. When in a performance, also at the Opera Comique, there was a fire in the theater, destroying all of the orchestral parts to the work. And so other people have continued to patch it together then since. It's changing again and then again through the early 20th century, meaning that what you were likely to see is a gobbledygook comprised together of a lot of people's visions post the original composer's death. And this means that there's really no set version when you go to the opera of what you are likely to see. So, to give you a brief idea, the plot of the Tales of Hoffmann is basically a prologue and epilogue about a very disillusioned poet who has decided to go to a tavern and drink himself to death because he has found a fourth love, and he's so cynical about it that he doesn't really think that he'll ever possess her, even though he really wants to. And so, rather than go meet her after a performance of Don Giovanni, he is going to sit there and drink himself to death. And the students in the tavern say, "Well, tell us, Hoffman, about your earlier loves and why you are giving up on the idea of love." And so he proceeds to do so along with his muse, who disguises herself as one of his best friends as we go throughout Hoffmann's stories. Now, going forward here, any of the three main stories can be really set up in the opera in whatever order. So the two versions I've seen, first at the Opera of Wrocław in Poland, and then here in the Opera of Ljubljana, have been in the order of the acts are usually named for his main love, so in the order of Olympia, Antonia, and finally Giulietta. But other directors have totally flipped these around, and as I said, earlier versions don't even include the final third act of Giulietta at all in the opera and move the famous Baracole to the act with Olympia, because even though it's really famous, it's not really meant to be sung by any of the main people in the opera necessarily. Um, so, keeping that in mind, let's move on to the cast of characters that you are going to see in whatever performance of the opera that is done, in whatever order these acts take place. Youch! The cast of characters in this opera, because it's three separate stories in each of the three main acts, comprises of something that looks like a list about yay long. And so, what I'm actually going to do here, rather than rattle off the entire list, what I'm going to do here is just tell you more about what you're likely to see when you go to a performance. So there's the main character, Hoffmann. There's his muse, who is a woman in disguise that goes with him throughout each of the three main acts. But then there is a different villain in each of the three acts, who is sometimes played by a different opera singer, a baritone, or is often played by the same baritone in each of the three roles in the main acts, and also the villain character in the prologue and epilogue. The same is true for the main soprano. Sometimes, in fact, usually it's done by three different soprani, but sometimes performances do try to do it with one singer in all three main guises. And The problem with this is it's rarely done because each of the three acts require three different types of soprano voice types. And so you really have to be an iron maven of a soprano to be able to handle all of the roles and the amount of singing it takes to do them in. And then there are various other minor characters that come and go as dictated by the needs of the three mini stories within the overarching plot. So again, it's just down to what the directors of the performance, what to do. And you will see all of these characters in some order, depending on the order that they decide to do the three main acts in. And you just have to be prepared to that when you go to the opera. So going forward, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the three main story acts in the order that I have seen them done in both times I saw the Tales of Hoffmann. So the first time in Wrocław, Poland, and the second time here in Ljubljana. Um, so moving on, we'll start with the prologue, in which a disheartened Hoffmann, who is sick of being rejected in love, shows up at a tavern and decides he's not going to even go after his fourth love, but instead would rather completely drink himself to death. The prologue actually starts not with Hoffmann himself, but with Hoffmann's muse, who is played by a mezzo soprano, who really would like to see Hoffmann devote himself completely to his work, rather than all of his very bad track records in love. And so, in order to help him see that he really should devote himself totally to his poetry, she is going to keep a watch on Hoffmann by cross-dressing and disguising herself as his best friend Niklaus, as he shows up in this pub very demoralized, and then to accompany him wherever he goes on that night in this tavern. So Hoffmann shows up, and he's really down-spirited because he is in love with Stella, this opera performer who is singing a role in Mozart's Don Giovanni, which is going on next door to the pub. And he has received a letter that Stella would like him to come meet her in her dressing room after the performance, which really would seem like a good thing, except Hoffmann is really cynical by this point in his life, and he's kind of like, yeah, well, it's all for naught, and rather than disappoint myself again, I'm going to sit here and drink. And so the students in the bar go, well, you're a poet, so while you're doing that, you want to entertain us. And so at first he sings this story about a dwarf, basically, to entertain them. And then he decides that he's going to just stay here for the rest of the night rather than go to Stella, and explain why he's here and why he's decided to do this and become so cynical by relating the three main stories of the main loves of his life. So we move on to, at least what I have always seen, is the first act about Olympia the automaton. Act 1 opens at the salon of a famous inventor in Paris. And Hoffmann is there, and he sees one of the inventor's creations, who is a very lifelike doll, and is in fact so lifelike that Hoffmann falls in love with her physique at first sight. Nikolaus, who is there, the muse, tries to sing a song about a girl who's actually an automaton in order to kind of gently hint that this girl isn't real. But she's then brought out among all of the guests, and she sings what is kind of the second famous most thing in the Tales of Hoffmann, but in my opinion should be the first most famous thing, what is colloquially referred to as the doll song, in which she sings a very coloratura piece with a lot of crazy jumps, but keeps unwinding and has to be continuously rewound. And so she sings this, and Hoffmann really becomes totally obsessed with her because another co-inventor, along with this inventor, has sold Hoffmann a pair of glasses that make her appear totally real. And so things move on to where Hoffmann is in love with Olympia, the doll, and is dancing with her until he dances too fast and falls down, and it reveals without the glasses, it really reveals Olympia to just be the doll that she is, not even real to begin with. And then the second inventor basically runs in really pissed off that he hasn't been paid for his co-creating services, and proceeds to rip Olympia, the doll, to pieces as all the other gatherees at the Saran make fun of Hoffmann for thinking that she was an actual woman. Act 2 opens as Hoffmann is at the house of his second love, Antonia, who is also a budding opera singer. And she's in the house of her father, where she's been sequestered away because she has some unknown disease. And her father tells her that if she doesn't want to go the way of her mother, who is also a famous opera singer, that she must not sing. And so he's keeping her alone in this house. But Hoffmann sneaks in, and they both sing a love duet together. And Hoffmann encourages her in her budding thespian and operatic aspirations. But then he sneaks out and eavesdrops as Dr. Miracle shows up and claims that he can treat Antonia's illness to her father. And the father basically tells him to fuck off. Having overheard what Dr. Miracle tells him, the father, about curing her disease and allowing her to sing again, meaning that currently, with whatever disease she has, it's never really clear. If Antonia sings, she's going to die. And so Hoffmann sneaks back in to her chambers and implores her to not really pursue her thespian dreams. But again, this is depending on the staging. Dr. Miracle somehow shows back up in her chambers, either with the blessing of the father or not, and encourages her to sing by conjuring up an image of her dead mother. She listens to the doctor, the evil doctor, and stings, and then dies, and Hoffmann has lost his second love, the love of artistry, I guess you'd say. Act 3. Ugh. Act 3, the part that wasn't even in the original performance of the opera, is sometimes flipped around and often used as Act 1, with Olympia getting shoved into Act 3, or has the famous baracole, if it is not performed at all, moved to the beginning of Olympia's act, because it's actually not really sung by any of the main characters. It's just baracole about love. So again, it's choose your own adventure for whatever staging the director of the particular performance you're going to see decides to do. It also has the most alternate endings of any of the acts. So the broad main strokes are that Hoffmann, who is now really cynical, which it makes sense for it to be the third act to me, because he's lost his wild-eyed abandon for love that he had when you saw with Olympia, and then lost the love of artistry of his life when she died. He's a really cynical guy who is at a parlor in Venice, and there is a famed courtesan named Giulietta. And he is really just like, love is bullshit. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not falling for the courtesan no matter what. And he sings a song about how much he'd rather just drink than even try. But there is an evil captain who tries to get Giulietta to seduce him anyway, on a bet that she can use a magic mirror, which he gives her, to steal Hoffmann's reflection. And so she's able to do this, and she steals Hoffmann's reflection, and then Hoffmann is understandably pissed at this, when at the same time one of Giulietta's former lovers shows up and is pissed at Hoffmann. And so the two of them get into a duel, but the captain gives Hoffmann a magic sword, which allows him to defeat the other suitor. Now, in some stagings of this, you're going to see Hoffmann really controlled by the evil captain's actions, who's really kind of a devil incarnate himself. And then really what happens in the end is, again, just which version you're going to go with, because this was totally unfinished by the time Offenbach died, apparently. So in some versions, Hoffmann then kills Julieta in a violent rage over her having seduced him and stolen his shadow. Sometimes, under the evil direction of the captain, he kills Julieta's true love, which is the humpback jester that she keeps around. Um, and in other, the evil captain also makes a potion that Julieta drinks and then dies. So it's just kind of go with whatever they do in usually Act 3. So that's Act 3. The epilogue, we are back in the tavern where Hoffmann has decided to drink himself to death, and he's way more deep in his cups than we have seen him at the beginning of the opera. Stella, the opera singer who was singing in Don Giovanni, shows up because he has not shown up to the tryst she has invited him for, along with the other guy who really wants to get in her pants. And Hoffmann basically says, "I'm done with this shit. I really am just not going to do it anymore." And tells the other suitor, go off and have a nice life. I'm just going to sit here and be cynical. Then at some point in all this, Nikolaus, the muse, really comes out dressed as a beautiful woman. And in the two stagings of the epilogue that I've seen, this is done in two totally different ways once again. So the first time I saw it, Hoffmann is just drunk and passes out. And the words that the muse says, and she doesn't sing them, she says them, which in opera, when someone is talking on stage and not singing, it is definitely a sign for holy shit, really big shit is going down here. It's not just opera bad, it's talking bad. So the first version, he's just drunk off his ass and passes out, and the muse laments that instead of all of these lost loves and distractions, why couldn't you have loved me, poetry, and the embodiment of poetry more? And in the second staging I saw, he literally has drunk himself to death, and the muse laments his death by saying those same words, "Oh, Hoffmann, why couldn't you have loved me more?" And that's the end. So the ending is kind of a downer, either way. But sometimes stagings put a bit more of a happy face on it. Again, all I can say here is just go with it. It's really choose your own adventure for the particular staging of the opera you're going to see, and thus just go with it. It's also kind of a choose your own adventure for you, the viewer, and for me. And the best advice I can just offer is to just roll with it. That being said, it has a lot of great singing with two really famous arias, the doll song in the first act and the baracole, which shows up depending on what you're going to do with the staging, either in the third act or the first act. But yeah, definitely worth going to see. It has some really clear, broad stories, despite all of the gobbledygook of who's staging what, how. I've told you the broad strokes that you're going to see. So that's that. Just one final note. In my works, in which I often include opera, I have also drawn some inspiration from Tales of Hoffmann, because in Tito's Lost Children, the trilogy which you can see back up there, there are two characters that are named for characters in Tales of Hoffmann. So in book one, there is an opera singer who is a Slovene nationalist and wants to see her country become independent. But in order to do that, she sacrifices herself and her singing career and dies singing in praise to an independent Slovenia. And kind of loses the guy who she has fallen in love with, one of the main characters in the series. She's named Antonia for the character in the second act, in honor of her, kind of, and also in honor of one of my actual relatives who was named Antonia. And then another character in the second book, who is a trained seductress and actually seduces that same main character into giving secrets from the faction that he's fighting with to stop the wars over to the Serbs. And she does so in a false identity. and that false identity is named Olympia because the false identity is completely fake. So total shout out in my books to Tales of Hoffmann. It's books 1 and 2 of Tito's Lost Children up there, and the link is in the description. So until the next time, I am that Slavic writer guy. I do what I do. Like this or don't, subscribe or don't. I don't give a fuck. And from here in Slovenia, as we say, na svidenje. See you again.